2 years to the day, and my hands still would not go quiet at his grave. I had come up to the ridge before the hold woke, the way I did every morning, but this morning the frost lay thick on the flat gray stone that bore my brother's name, and the cold of it went straight through my glove when I laid my palm there. Edrin. Just the one word cut into the rock, because a king does not weep over a long inscription, and I had not trusted my voice for more than a word the day we said it. Below me the Skell ran fast and black in its gorge, and above me the walls of Stonefell climbed the bluff in tiers of old stone, and between them on that ridge I stood shaking. Not with cold. I had worn the north my whole life. Cold did not touch me. My hands shook because 2 years gone they had told me my brother fell, that he lost his footing on the high path above the gorge in a storm and the river took him, and that when they found him 3 days downstream, there was nothing to be done but bring him home and bury him. They told me it, and the whole hold believed it, and I had stood at this stone and buried him with the storm and the river in my mouth like a stone I could not swallow. I had never believed it. Edrin had walked that path 1,000 times drunk and never slipped, and a man who slips does not have his sword half drawn when the river gives him back. No one had wanted to hear that. My war captain, Dreven, the man who found him, who brought him up out of the water in his own arms and laid him at my feet with grief written all over his hard face. Dreven had said gently, in front of the elders, that grief made a man see plots in an empty room, and that I would drive myself mad chasing a murderer where there was only a storm. And because he had loved Edrin too, or seemed to, and because the whole hold trusted the war captain who had held the border for 20 years, they had all nodded and pitied me, and let the thing be buried. So for 2 years I had hunted a killer I could not name, in my own walls, alone, going slowly to pieces where no one could see. My hands shook now the way they had shaken every morning since. I pressed them flat to the cold stone to still them, and they would not still. Then footsteps crossed the yard below, light on the frost, and everything in me went quiet. It was the maid. I knew her step before I knew it. Neve, the kitchens called her the silent one, the foundling they'd taken in the winter the border villages burned, a girl of maybe 20 who had walked out of the smoke of a dead hamlet with nothing and no voice to tell her name, so they gave her one. She never spoke, not a word in the months she'd been under my roof. She carried water and scoured pots and kept to the shadow of the walls, and the hold looked past her the way you look past a broom left standing in a corner. I had not looked past her. That was the thing I could not explain and had told no one, because a king does not say it aloud, that from the first day I saw her cross my yard with a yoke of water on her thin shoulders, something in me had turned toward her like a compass finding the pole. Not desire, or not only, and not the crude kind. Something older and stranger, a pull behind the breastbone that had no name I would allow it. I had watched her without meaning to for months. And now she crossed the frost below the ridge, small and gray in her scullery wool, unaware of me above her, and my hands, which had not been steady since the burial, went still on my brother's stone. Still, both of them, sure as they'd been before I ever lowered him into the ground. I looked down at them, at the frost melting under my quiet palms, and I felt the old grief rage in my chest loosen its grip a single notch, the way a fist unclenches, and I did not understand it, and it frightened me more than the shaking ever had. Below, the maid stopped. She had felt me, or felt something. She turned and looked up the ridge to where I stood over the grave, and for one long breath across the cold air her eyes met mine. And she went white. Not shy, not the duckhead modesty a servant shows a king. Her whole face emptied of blood as if I had drawn a blade on her, and her eyes went to the gray stone under my hands, to Edrin's name, and then back to my face, and there was such raw terror in her that I took a step toward the path before I knew I meant to. She fled, set down her yoke, and simply ran, back through the yard arch into the shadow of the kitchens, gone. I stood there with my hand on my dead brother's name, and my mind turning slowly, like a mill wheel in low water. Why would the sight of me at his grave frighten a mute girl half to death? I could not let it go. I have never been able to let a thing go. It is the reason I am a poor sleeper, and my brother used to say, a worse guest. So I began, quietly, to watch the girl the way I had trained myself to watch the whole hold, patient, unhurried, giving nothing away. I learned little at first, and all of it wrong-shaped. She worked harder than 3 women. She was gentle with the hold's dogs and its children and its old, and they were gentle back. The way animals and the very young and the very old are honest about who is safe. She could not, or would not speak, but she was not simple. I watched her once do sums on her fingers faster than my steward, and once catch a dropped bowl out of the air without looking, and once stand very still in a doorway listening to 2 grooms lie about a lamed horse, and I saw in her face that she knew to the bone they were lying. She missed nothing. She was the most watchful creature I had ever seen, and she had made herself the least seen. A person does that for a reason. And she was afraid of Dreven. I caught it the 3rd day. My war captain came through the lower yard in the evening, big and easy in his black wolfskin, laughing with 2 of his men, and the maid carrying Ash to the midden stopped dead in the arch, pressed herself flat to the cold stone of the wall, and did not move or breathe until he had passed and gone. She was the color of the ash in her hands. When he was gone, she stood a moment with her eyes shut, and then went on, and no one saw it but me from the gallery above. Everyone in Stonefell respected Dreven. Many feared his temper. No one looked at him the way that girl had looked, the way you look at the thing that has already happened to you. That night I did not sleep at all. I lay and thought about a mute foundling who went white at my brother's grave and flattened herself against a wall when my war captain passed, and I thought about a half-drawn sword coming up out of the river, and the mill wheel in me turned and would not stop. In the gray before dawn, I got up and went down to the kitchens myself, which a king does not do, and found her alone at the great hearth, banking the fire for the morning bread. She startled when my shadow fell across the coals and dropped to a knee at once, head down. "No," I said, more roughly than I meant and softer when she flinched at the roughness. "No, get up. I only want," and there I stopped, because near her, in the warm dark with the fire between us, the thing behind my breastbone had opened like a hand, and my grief had gone quiet and warm, and my whole body was telling me a truth my mind was not ready to hear. I stood there like a boy. "I only want to ask you something," I finished, "and you needn't fear the asking." She rose. She kept her eyes down, but I saw them move quick, taking my hands, my belt, the door, the way out, always the way out. "You lost your home in the border winter," I said. "The village of, I did not know it, no one did. The burned villages along the Skell." A small nod. "Which one?" She went still. Then slowly she lifted one hand and pointed, not vaguely, but with terrible precision, west and a little north, up the river, toward the high country above the gorge, toward the very stretch of border path where my brother was said to have slipped and drowned. The cold came up my spine. "You were near there," I said carefully, "2 years ago in the winter," not a question, "in the storm." And Neve, silent Neve, who had not made a sound in all her months under my roof, made a sound then. A small broken thing caught behind her teeth, half a word she would not let out. Her eyes filled. She shook her head once hard, and it was not a no, I wasn't there. It was a no, don't, please, no. I have made grown warriors weep with a look. I did not want in that moment to be a king at all. I wanted to be gentle, and I did not know how out of practice. "Neve," I said, her borrowed name, the only one she had, "if you saw something, on that path, in that storm." My voice was not steady. "He was my brother." She wept then without a sound, the tears running and her jaw locked shut, and she pressed both hands over her own mouth as if to keep something in that would kill her if it got out. And above us, in the yard, a horn sounded the change of the watch, and Dreven's voice carried down through the arrow slit, giving the morning orders, close, too close. She bolted for the far door. But at the threshold she stopped. She looked back at me over her shoulder, and in that look there was terror still, but under it something else had come up, something that had been drowning for 2 years and had just felt a hand in the dark. She looked at me the way you look at the one person left who might be safe. Then she was gone, and I stood alone in the warm kitchen with the bread fire ticking, and I knew 2 things I had not known an hour before. My brother was murdered, and she had seen it done. I did not go to Dreven. 2 years of hunting had taught me that much. I had no proof but a mute girl's terror, and against the word of a mute foundling the war captain of Stonefell would not so much as break stride. He would have her called mad, or a liar, or simply sent away, and I had begun to understand, cold in my gut, that sent away was a thing men like Dreven arranged to happen on lonely roads. If I moved too soon I would not avenge my brother. I would bury a second grave beside his, and this one would be my fault. So I went instead to old Ansel. Ansel had been loremaster of Stonefell since before my father held it, a dry, bent, sharp-eyed old man who kept the pack's records and its older law, the law that came down from the Munoth days that even my father had half forgotten. He lived among his rolls in the tower above the hall and came down for feasts and funerals and little else. When I climbed to him that evening, he looked at my face and set aside his pen and said, "You've the look your brother had, the week before he died, like a man who's found a thread and means to pull it though the whole coat come apart." "Tell me," I said, sitting where I had sat as a boy learning my letters, "about the witness line, the Munoth witnesses." His hands went still on the desk, the same stillness I had felt in my own, and I marked it. "Now there," he said slowly, "is a thing no one has asked me in 40 years. Where did a young king hear that old word?" "Nowhere, I'm asking." He was quiet a while. Then, "In the old days before your grandfather's grandfather, the packs did not settle their blood quarrels by the strength of the man who shouted loudest. They had the witnesses." He leaned back. "A line one family moon touched, they said, though who knows, born with a gift and a burden both. They could not unsee and they could not lie. Whatever a witness saw they carried entire to the last detail for all their days. And when a witness swore the Munoth and spoke of a thing they'd seen, the old law held their word above all other word, above a king's, above a war captain's. A witness's testimony could not be dismissed, could not be shouted down, could not be answered by rank or by the sword. It was the one still point the law would not let the powerful move." He spread his dry hands. "You can see why the powerful hated them. Over the centuries the line was hunted, married off, scattered, forgotten. The last of them, so the rolls say, died out along the western border generations ago." He looked at me shrewdly. "Why?" I did not answer him yet. My heart was going hard. Could not unsee. Could not lie. A girl who missed nothing, who knew a lie the moment she heard it, who carried something behind her teeth that was killing her to hold, who had come out of the western border where the line was said to have died. "If a witness lived now," I said low, "how would you know her? How would the hold know her past all doubt?" "By her memory first. A witness recalls a thing whole, past any doubting. The where and the when and the small true details no liar keeps straight. And by her token if her people kept the old ways, the moon and I, the witness sigil passed mother to daughter." He tapped the desk. "And by the oath. If a true witness stands in the hall and swears the moon oath and speaks, the oldest law of this hold, which I still keep, boy, whether the young remember it or no, compels every soul under this roof to hear her out and holds her word above challenge. It has not been called in living memory, but it was never struck. It sleeps in the rolls." His old eyes fixed on me. "Now, whose murder are you asking about, Torin?" "My brother's," I said. And I told him the half-drawn sword, the girl gone white at the grave, the maid pressed to the wall when Dreven passed, the finger pointing up the storm path. Ansel listened with his hands folded and his face going graver by the word, and when I finished he sat a long moment, And then he said the thing I had been circling for 2 years and had never let myself say plain. Your brother meant to hold this seat after you if you fell without an heir. Dreven meant to hold it himself. He has the men, the borders, loyalty, the years. Edrin stood between him and it. And Edrin, God keep him, was never good at hiding what he suspected. He shut his eyes. I said nothing 2 years ago. I told myself it was grief in you. I am an old coward and I have carried it. If that girl saw what you think she saw, he opened his eyes. Then she has carried it 2 years alone in a hold full of the war captain's men, unable to speak a word of it, knowing that to be believed she must first be heard, and that no one hears a mute foundling. She has been the bravest soul in these walls and the most alone. Go carefully with her, king. She is worth more than your vengeance. That last struck me like a blow because it was true and because I had known it in my body before I had it in words. I know, I said, and my voice cracked on it. I know she is. Ansel looked at me a long moment at whatever was in my face, and something in his old sharpness softened toward pity and toward wonder. Ah, he said quietly, so that's the shape of it. Well, he almost smiled. The moon does like its jokes. Go to her then. But go gentle and go tonight, because if you've seen what she is, so may others have, given time, and Dreven did not become war captain by being slow. I found her in the deep of the night, in the corner of the servants' loft where she slept apart from the others, sitting up awake in the straw with her arms around her knees as if she had known I would come. She did not startle this time. She had been waiting for me, or for the thing she'd feared for 2 years, and I think in the dark she was not sure which I was. I crouched down so I was not above her, so I was only a man in the straw, and I kept my voice very low. I'm not here to make you speak, I said. I know you can. I know what you are. I think I've always half known, the way a needle knows north. Ansel told me the rest tonight. I know why you can't unsee it, and I know why you daren't say it. So you needn't say it, just— My throat closed. I made myself go on. Just tell me I'm right, that's all. Nod and I'll carry the rest. Was my brother murdered? The moon came through the loft's one high window and lay across her thin face, and she looked at me with those watchful eyes that missed nothing, and for the first time since I had known her, she was not calculating the way out. She looked at me as if I were the way out. She nodded once. Something in my chest broke and was, at the same moment, mended, the 2-year stone finally shifting, grief and rage and grief again, and under all of it the strange, warm quiet that only came near her, holding me together while it broke. I bowed my head. When I could speak I said, Dreven. Her breath shuddered. She nodded again. You saw it on the storm path. And then Neve did a thing I did not expect and will remember to the last hour of my life. She reached out, this girl who had flinched from every hand for 2 years, and took my 2 big hands in her 2 small cold ones, and turned them palm up in the moonlight and looked at how still they were. Steady. And I understood that she had felt it too, whatever it was between us, that the same quiet that had come into me had come into her, that some part of her had known before her mind did, that the king who kept catching her eye across the yard was hers as surely as she was mine. Fated. That old word my mother used to say and I had scoffed at. She held my steady hands and she brought them to her own jaw gently, so I cupped her face. She was trembling and warm and alive, and she looked into my eyes and she chose to trust me. And she began at last to speak. Her voice was a rasp, unused, cracking on the first word like ice on the river, and it was the most beautiful and the most terrible sound I have ever heard. I was gathering, she whispered, on the high path. When the storm came I sheltered in the rocks above the gorge. I saw 2 men come up in the wind. One was, I know now, your brother. The other wore a black wolf skin. Her hand tightened on mine. They argued. Your brother had a paper. He said he'd found where the border silver was going. The tribute that never reached you, said he knew who, said he'd tell you before the thaw. The wolfskin man laughed and said no one would believe a word against the man who held the border. And your brother said he'll believe me. I'm his blood. Her eyes streamed. And the wolf-skinned man said, "Then it's a pity your blood is what he'll bury. And he drew, and your brother's sword was only half out, and she could not finish it." She pressed my hand to her wet cheek and shook, and did not need to finish it, because I had seen the sword come up out of the river. I held her, I who had not held anyone in 2 years. I held her while she shook, and when she could go on she told me the rest in her cracked whisper. How she had hidden in the rocks, not daring to breathe, while Dreven rolled the body into the gorge to let the skell tell his story. How she'd seen him take the paper from Edrin's coat, all but one corner that tore and blew away and lodged in the rocks where she hid. How, when the village she'd fled to was burned that same winter, by whom, she did not say, and I did not need her to, she had walked out of the smoke with 2 things sewn into her hem. A torn corner of a dead prince's paper and her dead mother's ring, a small worn silver thing stamped with a moon and an eye. She took it out now and put it in my palm, the moon and eye, the witness sigil. In the loft's gray light I looked at it, and then at her, and I thought of Ansel saying the powerful hated them, because their word was the one thing rank could not move, and I understood at last the whole shape of her terror and her silence and her 2 years of carrying my brother's death alone in a hall full of his killer's men. Because to be believed, a witness must stand up and speak in the open, before all, and the moment she did, the man in the black wolfskin would have every reason in the world to make sure she never spoke twice. "You've kept this 2 years," I said, "so that one day you could tell it and be believed. And you couldn't tell it because the telling is what he'd kill you for." She nodded and the tears came again, but not only fear now, something else. Relief so total it looked like grief. That the waiting was over, that someone finally knew, that she was not alone in the dark with it anymore. I closed her small hand around her mother's ring, and I closed my hands around hers, steady as stone. "You won't tell it alone," I said. "You'll tell it in my hall under the oldest law of this house, with an old man who keeps that law standing beside you and a king standing before you, and by the time you've finished there will not be a soul under this roof who can pretend they didn't hear. And Neve," I made her look at me, "after, whatever you want after. Stay, go, be free of walls forever. It is yours to choose, and I will see it done, and I will want nothing from you that you don't freely give. But I would give the rest of my life to the choosing that you stay." She looked at me a long time in the moonlight, this brave, silent girl who had carried my brother's death like a stone in her mouth for 2 years, so that justice would have a voice when it was safe. And she did not answer with a word. She had spent enough words that night for a lifetime. She turned her face into my steady palm and stayed there, breathing, and I felt the 2-year winter in me go out at last, and I knew her answer, and I held it like something breakable and did not let it go. We did it 3 nights later, and we did it right, because a thing worth 2 years of waiting is worth 3 days of getting the ground true beneath it. Ansel and I moved quietly. We had the torn corner of Edrin's paper, and it matched, God be praised, when Ansel drew from the deep rolls the tribute ledgers of the border years. The silver that had left the western holds and never reached my treasury, the trail Edrin had died carrying, still there in the numbers for a patient old man to find. We had the moon and eye ring, and Ansel with his own hand entered Neve into the rolls as the confirmed last daughter of the witness line, her memory tested against a dozen small true things only one who had truly been on that path could know: the shape of the rocks, the torn corner, the words said. And I sent a rider I trusted the length of the border quietly to 2 old lords who had never loved Dreven, and asked them to come to Stonefell for the anniversary feast of my brother's death, and to bring their men, and to say nothing. Dreven, I think, smelled something in the last days. He was not slow. He watched me watching him. He had the maid moved from the loft to the far scullery, to keep the girls from her madness, he said easily, and I let him, and I set 2 of my own oldest men to sleep across her door and told them what they were guarding and why. He came to me the evening before the feast, all warmth and worry, and said he'd heard I'd been climbing to Ansel's tower, and troubled myself again with old griefs, and hoped I was not letting the anniversary sink its teeth in me. I said grief was an old friend by now and thanked him for his care. He held my eyes a moment too long. I gave him nothing. 2 years of falling to pieces where no one could see had, at the last, taught me to keep a still face over a burning house. Then the night of the feast came. The hall of Stonefell was full. The elders, the border lords with their quiet men along the walls, the whole household down to the scullery, because on the anniversary of a prince's death the doors stand open to all. Dreven sat at my right hand in his black wolfskin, war captain, and in his own mind, king-in-waiting. Ansel sat at my left, bent over his rolls. And I stood when the meat was cleared and the hall went quiet for the king's word. 2 years ago tonight, I said, we buried my brother. They told me he slipped in a storm. I let it sit. I never believed it. You all knew I never believed it. You pitied me for it. I looked down the hall. Tonight I am going to tell you why I was right, and I am going to do it under a law older than this hall, which the loremaster of this house still keeps, and which binds every soul beneath this roof, king and captain alike. Beside me Dreven had gone very still. Ansel. Read the law. Ansel rose, and in his dry old voice read out the moon oath law of the witnesses, that when a true witness of the moon line, confirmed by the rolls, stands and swears the oath and speaks of a thing seen, every soul present is bound to hear her out entire, and her word stands above all challenge of rank or blade, and no man may raise voice or hand against her while she speaks, on pain of the hall's oldest justice. When he finished, the border lords who knew their history had gone grave, and the household murmured, and Dreven laughed, easy and warm, and said, "A pretty old tale, king, but the witness line died out 100 years ago, unless you mean to swear the crows in the tower." "The line did not die," said Ansel, "as the rolls now show. There is a daughter of it under this roof." And I said, "Bring her." They brought Neve down the length of the hall in the torchlight, small and gray and straight-backed, her mother's moonandai ring on a cord at her throat where every man could see it, and I watched the color go out of Dreven's face as it had gone out of hers at the grave 2 years before. He knew her. He had always known her, the girl from the burned village, the one who should have died in the smoke and hadn't, the loose thread he'd never quite pulled because who listens to a mute? And now she walked toward him with a king's men at her shoulders and an old law at her back. And I saw the exact moment the war captain understood that the one thing his rank and his sword could not move had walked into his house, wearing scullery wool. He moved. Of course he moved halfway up, hand to his belt, a snarl breaking through the warmth. "This is madness. The girl is a mute half-wit. She cannot even." "By the law just read," said Ansel, sharp as I'd ever heard him, "no man raises voice or hand against a sworn witness while she speaks. Sit, war captain. Or answer the hall's oldest justice." And the border lord's men had come off the walls, quiet, and Dreven looked at them, and at me, and at the girl, and he sat slowly, because a clever man knows the one instant when fighting only proves the charge. Neve came and stood in the open before the high table. Ansel gave her the oath, and she swore it in her cracked, rusted, growing stronger voice. And then in a hall gone so silent I could hear the torches breathe, my brother's murder was told at last, told entire, in the terrible whole memory of a witness who could not unsee and could not lie. The high path, the storm, the 2 men, the paper, the words said, "He'll believe me, I'm his blood, then it's a pity your blood is what he'll bury," the half-drawn sword, the body rolled into the gorge, the torn corner of the paper caught in the rocks. And Ansel laid that torn corner on the table beside the tribute ledgers, and the numbers matched, and the border lords looked at the silver Dreven had stolen laid bare in the rolls, and one by one the faces in that hall turned toward the man in the black wolfskin, the household that had trusted him, the elders who had pitied me instead of hearing me, the men who'd carried his lies for 2 years without knowing. I did not have to do anything. That was the strange mercy of it, and Neve's true gift. I did not have to shout, or draw, or be a king breaking a man across my knee. She spoke, and the law held her word above his, and the truth simply stood in the middle of the hall where no one could any longer pretend not to see it. Dreven looked around at a room that had, in the space of a girl's testimony, stopped being his. There was nowhere in it left to stand. He was taken that night, and judged by the border lords and the elders under the same old law, and I did not kill him, though every day for 2 years I had dreamed of it. I gave him instead to the hall's oldest justice, cast out beyond the border he'd betrayed, stripped of name and wolfskin and men, a thing far worse than death to a man like that, to walk the world nameless as the foundling girl he'd tried to keep silent. The doubters who'd pitied me came to me with lowered eyes, and I did not gloat, because grief is not made better by another man's shame, but I marked that not one of them ever again spoke over Neve, or looked past her, or called her the Silent One. They had heard her now. You cannot unhear a thing like that. The next anniversary, I climbed the ridge before the hold woke, the way I always had. The frost lay thick on the gray stone that bore my brother's name, and the skell ran fast and black below, and Stonefell climbed the bluff behind me in its tiers of old stone. I laid my palm on the cold rock on the one word cut there, Edrin, and my hand was still. It had been still for a year near her, and it was still now, not because the grief was gone. Grief like that does not go, nor should it, and I would not have traded the ache of him for anything, because the ache is the last of the love and I mean to keep it. But it had stopped being a stone in my chest I could not swallow. It had become something I could hold and set down and pick up again gently, the way you carry a thing you love. That was her doing. That was the quiet she had brought into the winter of me, the one no counsel or crown had ever reached. Footsteps crossed the frost. Light. I knew them before I turned. Neve came up the ridge path with 2 things in her hands, a small clay lamp and a flame cupped against the wind. She was not gray now. She wore the deep blue of the hold, and her back was straight, and she looked at me across my brother's grave with those watchful eyes that still missed nothing, only now there was no way out in them. There was only me, and she was not looking for the door. She had found her voice over the year it came and went, stronger some days than others, still cracking when she was tired, but she did not use it now. Some things are said better in the doing. She knelt by the gray stone and set the little lamp in the hollow at its base, out of the wind, and lit it, and it caught and held, small and gold and steady in the gray dawn. A witness lamp, she said when it was burning. Her rasp had gone soft as worn silver. My mother kept one in the old country, for anyone who died unseen, so that, she looked up at me, so that no death in a house goes unwitnessed again, ever, not while there's someone left to light it. I knelt beside her in the frost, this king who had not knelt to anything in 2 years but grief, and I put my arm around her, and we watched the little flame stand steady against the wind over my brother's name. My hand was still on her shoulder. Her head came to rest against me. Below us the hold began to wake, and the smoke of the morning bread went up, and the day came on the way days do, whether we are ready or not. Stay, I said, not a command. I had asked her once to choose, and she had chosen, and I asked it again every day of my life, not because I doubted her, but because I never tired of hearing it. Choose it again. And Neve, the foundling they had looked past, the Silent One, the last daughter of the Munoz line, the bravest soul in these walls, the still point my whole cold kingdom had turned toward without knowing why, reached up and closed her small warm hand around my steady one, on her shoulder, in the light of the little lamp that would not go out. I already have, she said. Every morning I'll keep on. And the frost melted under my quiet hand, and my brother's flame burned steady in the wind. And for the first time in 2 years, I stood on that ridge at dawn and did not shake at all.